No, Michael.
¿No?
Yeah.
¿Hola? Ah. Hola, hola. Vale. Well, maybe, shall we switch this one?
Yes. Okay.
Well, we are just testing this because this is the first occasion that we are trying this new equipment. So we are like lab rabbits, okay? Well, good morning to everyone. On behalf of the University of Girona, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the 8th International Symposium for Young Researchers. The first time. Girona is situated in a tourist old town, nestled in the former 13th century. Gastronomy, culture and tourism. Okay.
This goes to the doctor.
Maybe, yeah. The UNESCO Chair of Cultural Policies and Cooperation, the Costa Brava Girona Tourist Board, Girona City Council, and thank you all again for being here, and I hope you have a productive and enjoyable symposium.
Thank you. I will try not to touch anything. I think that this works now. We got the connection with, Okay, so I'm also very, very happy to open the 8th International Symposium for Young Researchers in Tourism. This is a kind of adventure that started in 2011 at EIREST. EIREST is for Équipe interdisciplinaire de recherche sur le tourisme at Paris Panteó-Sorbona. At that time, in collaboration with the UNESCO Chair, Culture, Tourism and Development, as a kind of biennial event that would make it possible to capture emerging research on tourism at the very moment of its production. This was the idea behind this symposia. The first symposium for young researchers was so then organized in 2011, just 3 years after to create an event which is today, I believe, one of the most important and more, how can I say, quintessential events in EIREST for young researchers, with this idea of offering a plateau to young researchers to present their works. And in fact, they rested during the last years. Since 2011, we had more than 50 PhD students, now doctors. We have approximately 18 PhD students now, so you understand why these symposia for young researchers are so important. The longevity of these symposia for young researchers attest, I believe, to the importance of these meetings, which attract PhD students from different regions of Europe and beyond, and to the necessity also of these opportunities for exchange at a stage in doctoral research when the research may already be well advanced, but where and questions that need to be discussed and shared. And this is why the Symposia for Young Researchers play a very important role, I believe, in the tourism studies global landscape. Firstly, because they provide this opportunity to present emerging studies on innovative themes, employing often new methodologies which are not fully tested yet, and also new methodological tools. Secondly, they are a forum to debate, discussion, and exchange, held in a usually informal way, and I think this is important. I mean, here you can say whatever you want to say, nobody will formalize. The idea is to test ideas. You are not coming here with an established research, so I think this gives a kind of possibility to go beyond the usual formalism that we can find in some other symposia. Thirdly, these meetings are valued and rewarding because the selected presentations can be published in journals, and we will speak about this also after this meeting. And fourthly, I think that these symposia offer the possibility, the opportunity of a highly formative context for the young researchers who organize these symposia. And I think this is not always easy. Maybe we'll have some feedback from the colleagues, the team, the dream team who organized this conference here. Maybe it's not always easy, but I think this is extremely instructive. So this year, for the first time, was so happy really to organize this symposium in collaboration with the Institute for Research on Tourism of the University of Girona. This is a kind of mutation. Speaking about mutations, this is a mutation of the concept of the symposia. And we are really happy that the University of Girona accepted to co-organize and to host this event here in this wonderful place. I believe that we are in one of the most beautiful universities in Europe and beyond. So we are really thrilled with the also exceptional professionalism with which the team of young researchers here in Girona organized this event in a so short time since we started discussing about the possibility of organizing this event here in February, very first discussion. So it went in a kind of incredible quick way and very, very efficient. So this says, I believe, a lot about the terrific efficiency of the organizing team, and I really would like to thank you very, very much. Let me say two words about the topic now, why mutations, which maybe in English is less clear than in French, mutation. When we speak about mutation, I think that everybody understands what we are speaking about. I don't know how it goes for Spanish and Catalan, but in English we would say change or evolution, not necessarily mutations, but we kept this word. So mutations, because we try to explore these profound changes affecting the tourism sector currently. Recent upheavals, whether the crisis linked to COVID-19 and the impacts after this crisis, economic crisis, changes also linked to digital technology, the climate crisis, also all this together, this kind of systemic, in fact, crisis, invite us to examine how these contextual mutations and also the tourism system as a whole. So we experienced a lot of repeated shocks during the last years. The tourism industry have, in fact, highlighted its vulnerability, and we saw how vulnerable this industry is. However, this vulnerability of destinations or of tourism stakeholders has also led to the creation and implementation of effective solutions to strengthen resilience, some of which are accelerating the major transformations observed in tourism practices. Just to go back, but not that back, let's say in the 1970s, the massification of tourism was based mainly on a dominant relationship with space. The increase in travel, the distance of the destinations were factors of social distinction. Today, on the contrary, there is criticism of this junk mobility, represented in particular by low-cost travel and also the increase of short flights. In a context of stronger environmental awareness, travel mobility, particularly long-distance travel, is no longer necessarily synonymous with emancipation. And as the values associated with mobility evolve a lot during the last years, visitors are discovering that they are not longer necessarily welcome everywhere, as we have seen in Europe in recent years with all these tourismophobic phenomena and protests. At the same time, the economic crisis of the early 20th of economic inequalities around the world are contributing to the inequalities in holiday travel and important for France, I believe also for Spain, of social tourism. A major focus of the spread of tourism practices in the coast largely undermined since the early 1980s. All social progress that was done in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, today, for example, disappears. Added to this, there are a number of factors that have exacerbated the sector's difficulties, and I'm still speaking about the social sector, including the stagnation of employees' purchasing power, higher standards of comfort and safety, changing demand, more demanding and individualistic, reducing and fragmenting the length of stays, and competition also from the for-profit sector. So just in the example of the social tourism, we see that the mutations in France that I know better, they are so huge that we don't know today how to deal, for example, with this sector. Periods of crisis, more generally, are often characterized by changes also in consumer practices, which translate into new business paradigms aimed at satisfying new and emerging demands. In this respect, the digital revolution has made it possible to respond to some of these issues and mutations, in particular through a process of disintermediation characterized by the development of platforms that bring residents and visitors into direct contact with each other. We know that the tourists are not anymore just consumers. They are guests in the context of new collaborative accommodation offerings, but also producers of travel through digital intermediation. And according to analysis in the field of cultural economics, we have tourism characterized by greater involvement of consumers in the production of their experience, to the point of blurring, in fact, the boundaries between creators and consumers, and also pushing traditional creators to find new business models, traditional providers to find new business models. So new terms are invented to describe this hybridization of roles, combining creation and consumption, such as prosumers, proposed by Gazili for platform users providers, or production to describe this new role of the tourist. Tourism studies, and this is not new, the first writings about this start in the 1970s, 1980s, start already speaking about a post-tourism era. This post-tourism era could be characterized by the dissolution of tourism as a field promoting specific forms of sociability, spatiality, and temporality. So all these things that we very carefully, all of us circumscribed in our tourism departments. All this today is under question. And in fact, this is also why the very issue of the tourism studies today is globally questioned. We are attending a kind of differentiation between tourism and non-tourism, whether in terms of places or practices, and of course offers. So a lot of mutations, and these mutations affect both the way people travel, preparing and taking a trip, and the way people work in the tourism sector, which is not immune to the economic changes brought by mainly the platform capitalism. Digital technology is also introducing new relationships with space and is leading to re-examine the very definition of tourism through the virtual mobility. Virtual tourism, a few years ago, if I discussed with my geographer colleagues, as a geographer, if I even dare to speak about virtual tourism, I would be killed. Today, this becomes something that is still discussed, of course, but it is also accepted within disciplines such as geography that founds its very paradigm on spatial mobility. So virtual tourism, which is understood as the discovery of alternative realities or worlds, whether or not they have a physical reality outside their digital manifestations, because this also happens more and more. We are visiting places which are not just reproductions, but they are totally simulacra, and in which tourists travel without their bodies. This is also something which is, in a way, weird, though it becomes very banal today. All this raises a lot of questions. How do online and offline tourism practices interact? Travel preparations and travel, combination of experienced travel and shared travel online. How are the processes of geographical or cultural othering usually considered to be at the heart of the tourism experience and closely associated with physical travel being redefined, when in fact in a virtual tourism you don't meet the other. You don't really are faced to the otherness, how this in fact transforms tourism. And many other questions, of course, remain to be explored, the transformations in the relationship to space, interconnections between these new forms of travel and the pre-existing tourism system, which still exists and needs, in fact, to be transformed, because we cannot erase the existing, because there is a new reality which is now presenting. So these are some of the questions that we will discuss during these days. We have 40 presentations, which is wonderful. We have people coming from all parts of the, well, more or less, all parts of the world, papers from Spain, and most universities in Spain. This is wonderful, the representation of Spanish universities here, from France, from Portugal, from Slovenia, from Morocco, from Algeria, from Turkey, from Brazil, from Madagascar, from China. I hope that I do not forget, do I? Did I mention all the countries? And I think in another world, in a world where we could, as researchers, be able to travel where we wanted to travel, we would have much more, in fact, presenters from some other countries, presenters that were not able to come because of visa issues, and this is terrible because this happens, a huge problem in most of our conferences. So before concluding, and apologies to be long, I really would like to thank again the co-organizers from the University of Girona and from Paris and Panteó-Sorbona, but a very special thank to the team of the PhD students in Girona, in the University of Girona, who deserve, I think, a big applause, really. Can we see you? Can we see you?
Please.
Stand up.
Stand up. Stand up. Stand up.
Yeah, this is for you. So, commitment and professionalism. Thank you so much. And days of exchanges and and other social events. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Now? Okay, good. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker of the conference, Professor Dr. Janne Leibert, who is the Professor of Tourism and Director of the Center for Tourism, Innovation and Culture at the University of Southern Denmark. Janne has developed the field of tourism co-design. She is an expert in sustainability, collaboration, protected areas, and tourism higher education. As an example of this one, she was the creator and has been the coordinator of the prestigious Erasmus Mundus European Master of Tourism Management, which a few of us in this room happen to have studied. Janne served as chairman of the board of the UNESCO World Heritage Bodensee National Park in Denmark between the years of 2015 and 2023. As of October 1st, 2025, so in less than a month, she will be welcomed here at the University of Girona as a distinguished Sarah Hunter professor. Welcome, Janne.
Thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you also, Barbara, for your introduction. You just sort of deflated the idea that the glimpse of my future has now already been visualized or verbalized, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. So thank you again. It's a very big pleasure for me to be here. It's an honor to present to you, and I must say that working with PhDs has always been part of the most enjoyable aspects of being a professor. So, I am going to take the time today to explore ways where tourism researchers can identify and work with complexity, uncertainty, and begin to imagine desirable tourism futures. And when invited to the International Academy for the Study of Tourism last year, to present my work, what I've done for my entire lifetime in 15 minutes, I made this capture of my work, and it makes use of a very simple color code. So the black font color represents my 3 intertwined areas of research. As Barbara said, tourism, higher education, natural protected areas, and sustainable and regenerative tourism development. The blue font color represent 4 actions, or what you could also call service to society and government. And the outer force field at the top, alpha, collaboration, and beta at the bottom, co-designing, challenged the notion of interest-free and self-centered research in tourism. Because I see a need for collaborative, reflective, and reflexive vigilance on the human nature connectedness and the world-making power of tourism, which is no small imperative. So my take is that in order to advance tourism research, whether in the form of higher education or in practice in society, it is something we do together. It is something that we do with others. And that is the gist of tourism co-designing, which I'll explain to you in more detail. Sorry. The rationale behind my presentation and my work rests on 2 questions. Are sustainable tourism development and the SDGs appropriate for addressing the challenges of the Anthropocene? We know that we have consumed and destroyed natural resources at an unprecedented rate, both causing material and environmental impacts that are going to outlive us for more than 10,000 or 100,000 of years. And I'm afraid that human progress, when limited to traditional measures such as GDP, visitor arrivals in tourism, and reliance on governments to take action, to mention but some concerns, the scale and urgency of transformation or mutations will not be met. So again, how can tourism researchers begin to engage in tourism world making, drawing on Hollinshead from 2007, where humans as well as nature can flourish? The title of my presentation on co-designing regenerative tourism, where I added, according to what is not in your program, futures in plural, which I'll return to, rests on 2 publications from this year, one accepted in Richard Butler's book on tourism futures, and an unconventional piece of publication in open access with Dr. Eva Duedal, where we came together, essentially having worked together for 5 years, to also meet our own, or address our own frustrations with conventional publishing, and the way that all journals have to fit more or less the same mold. So this is an open access publication, and I've made a literature list, a reference list at the end, which will be available for you as well, where you can download it for free. The frustration also rests on a question raised by Brian Wheeler back in 2010, where he questioned whether scholars publish where it makes the most impact, or whether we publish for our own self-interest and for the benefit of our own CVs. But what do we actually mean by a sustainable future? You know, as well as I do, I'm sure, the colorful palette of 17 SDGs, which rests on the Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainable development from 1987. But if you look carefully, we see actually 17 goals, more or less, all of which are goals that define a world without goals without hunger, without poverty, without climate change, without inequality, you name it. What kind of vision is that for the future, for 2030? Where's the positive version of where we want to be? Where's the goals for a world with? Where are the imaginations? And with different futures that are contingent, of course, upon inequality that rests on the past and present, how can we even talk about just a future, as if there's only one model that fits all? And when we move to tourism, then we have, from UN Tourism 2024, seen a slight difference in terms of, or at least the development, so it's not only about meeting the needs of present host and tourist coming to different areas of the world, but they talk about an appropriate balance between the 3 dimensions of environment, economic, and sociocultural aspects to guarantee the long-term sustainability of tourism. Now, have you ever wondered about how that can be, and if it makes sense? To me, it's quite interesting, because we're still talking about tourism as if it was a need, which clearly it is not. We all survived the pandemic without traveling. Maria just introduced virtual travel. So the anthropocentric concept of tourism as a need is mistaken, right? When we look at and also tourism as a right, for that matter, just to add another dimension, when people during COVID also complained that we have the right to travel, I'm sorry to say, but no, we don't have the right to travel. In the Human Rights Convention from 1949, it says everybody has the right to leisure. It doesn't say everybody has the right to tourism. So we've forgotten that tourism is a privilege. It is only for the few who have the time and discretionary income and the right passport, mind you, to travel. And what's an appropriate balance? Who determines that, right? Who's to issue that long-term guarantee? And is it about sustaining tourism, as in sustainable tourism, or is it about looking at tourism as a means to sustainable development? So let me take you into my sort of ideas and work on collaboration, and what the co-designing actually entails. Now, my many degrees which Barbara had to adjust to, like what's up with the 2 doctorates, and what's up with this huge ring you're carrying on your finger, only for special occasions? Well, that's my second PhD, my professorial dissertation, you could say, which I wrote and defended in 2013, called Towards a Collaborative University, based on lessons from tourism education and research. And after 6 hours of defending my dissertation, I was then awarded that second degree of a doctorate. Its original contribution is in the juxtaposition of traditional and ultra-modern themes and focusing on the possibilities of the university. So I set out to explore not only what the university was and is, but also what it ought to be in the world, in the 21st century. And certainly also to avoid sort of reproducing or a blind reproduction of the university, while being around colleagues who said, oh, it was so much better in the old days. Everything was so much easier. And I thought, well, what was it like in the old days? What was the original idea of being at a university? So that we can begin again to explore more desirable futures. And the notion of collaboration I borrow from Hoxham, where he, based on organizational research, says that the hypothesis of collaboration is that the sum of the work will always be more than its individual parts. So I'll return to that also in a second. But collaboration and the co's, whether collective, connective, cooperative, the collaborative aspect in that co is very easily diluted. And coming from the land of Lego, if you look at cooperative to the far right, you can see sort of individuals bringing their piece of the puzzle or their piece of the Lego brick to something we're doing together. But essentially, that doesn't change anything. We just sort of add on the propensities that are already there, right? We bring our own idea and it stays exactly as it is, but it might have a new shape or form. But when we talk about collaboration, we see arrows going left and right and center. And it means that the outcome from collaboration could never be achieved by just those 4 individuals. It will always be more. And I used to say to my students that when you truly collaborate, then 2 + 2 must always be at least 5. Otherwise, it's not it's a waste of time. Generate something that you couldn't do alone. And through that, perhaps also begin to work on generating collaborative advantage. So we don't do this just to collaborate, that's not the aim. It is to generate something that none of us could do alone. So, in a publication with John Tribe from 2016 called The Tourism Knowledge System, I'm still in the outer band with collaboration, by the way. We try to look at how collaboration implicates both. I don't know if the pointer works. I'll see. No, sorry. Anyway, in the outer band here, you can see person, position, global capital, ideology, and government, or governance in that sense. They will all have some effect on how collaboration can be achieved. It is also a way to illustrate that collaboration can never be a neutral understanding. So choosing with whom to collaborate will always exclude others from the epitome of competition. And it excludes other people, or institutions for that matter, from the inner circle of collaborative practice. And then lastly, one more in terms of the outer band, better. I want you to note the difference between design and designing. Design as a noun and as a verb. And designing is a process that takes us from what is currently to what might be. So the speculative nature comes into being. It's a process of change which takes interventions, right? So it doesn't come about automatically. It might, if you choose not to engage. But there's an opportunity here for real action when you engage in collaboration, in designing. And then last but not least, in terms of sort of the framing of this, tourism co-designing is a process of participatory inquiry. So you as a researcher will be engaged as full-bodied persons in asking questions, in challenging what is already known in order to transform existing practice. Now, it is a methodology that departs from developing tourism for somebody to collaboratively working with others to design tourism that fits their particular place and context. And it is also a matter of tourism co-design to experiment, right? And through that collaborative process, of course, you need time to begin to trust others, which is a very important aspect in order to both take the time to do so, and that's why I said if it doesn't equal more than 5, then it's a waste of time. But keep exploring and maintaining that complexity. Now, the language associated with tourism co-design is quite different too, because again, it challenges the language of what we know. It's not developing something to arrive at a goal, but it's actually engaging in the processes. It's working with those tensions where it becomes really difficult because we don't always agree. And things don't change unless we begin to listen to what is the other person actually telling us. Instead of just maintaining, well, I know what I'm ready to defend, so I'll state my point and then I'll withdraw and finish listening to the others even though I don't really listen. So the act of listening in order to understand where are other people coming from. And when you engage, whether it's students or practitioners or a mix of both, into such a co-design process, it is very important that you create a space where people can explore, where they can reveal, and they can actually leverage those different variations of interpretation, not to arrive at the lowest common denominator, but a shared understanding of what co-designers would call a synthesis of understanding, which they can identify with. In other words, that they can take ownership of. So with all these perhaps weird words, I'll show you what it looks like in practice. Because in a minute I'll play a short video which was developed as part of a research project with 2 EMTM graduates, Birte Menke and Christophe Tomei, where we during 2021 and 22 managed to engage 11 Danish protected areas, more than 120 human stakeholders to co-design and imagine what sustainable tourism would look like in their park. So what I'm about to show you now, there's no sound, so don't despair in that regard. What you'll see is a joint mapping of a park. They were given a task, very specific, to say, here's a blank piece of canvas, show us what your park looks like. And that means that all those very different stakeholders had to negotiate what they actually associate with their park. They gradually begin to realize that they all value the area, and that is actually why they're there, and that they identify with the park. We also asked them to bring memorabilia or an object they associated with the park, which you'll see as well in the film. And when they placed the object on the park they'd created, they also had to explain in turn what that meant to them. And suddenly, the whole atmosphere changed because it became personal. Right? This is my object, something that I love about this park. This is why I care for the park. So again, those tensions that we deliberately provoke or make interventions that will help uncover, they help leverage those tensions and their understandings. And eventually, it also helps engender trust, but I'll return to that in a second. Now, take a look for yourself. Now, do you get what I mean by variations of interpretation? Right. Somebody brought a National Geographic magazine because part of that particular park is also World Heritage. Others brought winter wheat because the park is also subject to conventional farming. People still live within the park. Others brought a hymn. Some brought smells and materials, artifacts natural artifacts they found in the park as well. And there's a small horse because one used to be, enjoying horse riding in the park. So lots of different activities, lots of different associations, but together an appreciation of the park where they then could begin to say, well, with all these multiple usages, how can we protect the area and begin to imagine what it ought to look like in the future? Now, moving sort of straight to my point is that tourism co-design is not just a methodology or a method, like running workshops is what you've just seen evidence of. It's very much about the interventions that can facilitate a new attuning, a new understanding, a new sensibility to the phenomena of lived life. It is a way also to get people to talk about what they take for granted at an everyday basis. And it is about the willingness to experiment and to get to points where it is, again, the experiments will not fail. They might not end up as you had imagined, but you can always learn from them. And that's sort of an antidote to best practice. Right? Because if you just repeat best practices everywhere where you come around them and take them back home, all you have is a poor copy. Right? So beginning to play with the making real what could be is also a way to practice or rehearse futures that have not yet been determined. Right? And it is very much to understand, again, our beings as individuals and the development of tourism as something that is constantly in the making, right? As opposed to a status quo and very much segmented into different stages. We carry our past and our present with us, right? And that would also influence what kind of future we would like to see. To try to be more specific and contrasting, I've taken this slide to show you to the left what a traditional development project of tourism would look like. I'm sure you've made them yourselves, right? So we have, in this case, an Interreg project with colleagues from Germany and the Netherlands. There's an overall objective, and then you got the arrows and the work packages, and you know what? At the end, we will have that strategy everybody agrees on. I'm sure you can recognize this, right? And coming back to my point about world making, the world doesn't work like that, right? It is completely messy, and hence the process of inquiry that we need to start somewhere, and we move towards, have our first research question, and then we begin to realize that there's so much more we would like to explore. And I'm sure some of you in your research process too, hopefully during your PhDs, have been going all over the place, and your supervisors have been really, concerned about, oh, where is she going with this? But unless you keep asking questions, right, opening your minds, it might actually be that you return to your original research question, but at least then you've done that rigorous research that needs to be actually done in order to produce something original. So it is ongoing, it's relational, it has a start, and of course, with all types of research, it also has an end, right? But all those people and entities you meet along the way will somehow be able to also influence and work with you and therefore also contribute to what that end product you're going to end up with. In tourism higher education, which I'm very passionate about too, that way of thinking, of course, has implications. Because instead of looking at a Cartesian way of learning as knowledge as a substance which I as an individual must acquire, and then I can regurgitate that, and I can call it, knowledge transfer. I give you something, and then you better understand what I'm saying up here, because otherwise you've missed everything. Then we understand learning from a social point of view, right? That it is about the exchanges, it's about our participation in order to come into the very beings that we are, right? And that our understanding will always be socially constructed. It is not either or, it is both and. And what has been guiding the European Master in Tourism Management for all the years that it has existed is that we've insisted on to keep asking questions and to keep transforming the subjects that we teach in order to learn from a complex world. So Julian Burton, who is a professor in education at the University of Surrey, has captured this years ago, where he says, well, it's about well-being. It's about the choices you make in life. It is about asking what questions. And of course, there will be all the unknowns to the left and dark clouds that will impinge on your projects and your being as you go along. But they are there. They're part of how the world works. And last but not least, an image from one of my tourism co-design classes in Denmark, where the issue of reflexivity with an X and the fact that you bring yourself into your research projects, right? We're not just educating the top of your minds, but you're embodied persons. So how can we begin to educate for authentic being, where you are cognizant of the values you bring in and to begin to question those? And that is, of course, then coming back to my outer force field. That is the person in that research project, research paper on the tourism knowledge system, and the mutations, perhaps, that tourism higher education ought to undergo. Moving quickly on to regenerative tourism. Now, we're in this fabulous place, as Louise introduced, and you said, how many centuries? 8 centuries ago this was built. I'm only going back 300 years, 3 centuries, because since the European Renaissance, that marked the period from where we transitioned from the Middle Ages to modernity in Europe, we've been guided by a mechanic view of the world, which has brought significant specialization of human activities, of knowledge, and technological development. But this particular paradigm, the mechanic paradigm, we often associate with Isaac Newton. So he taught us that actions always bring about an equal or opposite reaction. Again, an opposite reaction, pay attention to that. And that means we can study the component parts. This AI-generated image, when I started asking, what would it actually look like if you were to produce an image of this? It looks like a Swiss clockwork. This is a reproduction of the world, what it looks like when you have a mechanic worldview. And those mechanic and substantialist explanations of world phenomena, they install order in our world. And we do that through differentiation, by categorical differences between us and them, human and nature, work and leisure, human and animal for that matter too. And while most of you will have come across readings on tourism as a complex system phenomenon, it is still primarily addressed in its component parts, as well as it is taught in its component parts in order to better manage predictive outcomes. But to me, after 25 years of working with sustainable tourism development, since my PhD in the Caribbean back in the 1990s, it appears very much to me that sustainable development is orientated to the past, trying to maintain a presence in the balance at the middle, while adding no harm. It's trying to maintain a status quo that, as soon as I've said it, no longer is. And with the crisis, I would say planetary crisis, and the ever-evolving nature of socio-economic and ecological systems, it makes, at best, an oxymoron to try to maintain a balance. And while contemporary reality would evidence to me that sustainable development on a broken planet is no longer enough, where we have instruments of sustaining green growth, we've forgotten that humans are nature too, if we even knew that we were nature in the first place. So regenerative thinking adopts a holistic perspective, a whole systems thinking that acknowledges that the world is always more than the sum of its parts, just like I said collaboration is. And it's a way to try to pay attention to the diversity of elements, to the complex interactions and interrelations, and to the particular context in which tourism takes place. And that means, again, we need to create something that is more than those individual aspects on its own. We have so many prefixes to tourism. and where it seems almost to me as if, as long as it's something that's an antidote to mass tourism, then it's better, right? Which is, of course, full of normative valuation. But my argument is that it's not an alternative to sustainable development, and it's certainly not a new form of prefix tourism. Other scholars, colleagues have said, oh, it's about giving back to nature, that this is what we ought to do as human beings. Or about individual thinkers who are very much more conscious than myself, who can transform practice. Others have said, well, it already covers all these existing sustainability approaches. But to me, it is very much about for new ways of thinking. The mutation, the transformation lies in here in order to change how we do and practice tourism. And that leads me to the point that I think, and my work so far, will also talk to how a paradigm shift is needed. So, tourism doesn't take place in a vacuum. Tourism is not a system in and of itself. It is related to climate change, to safety, biodiversity loss, etc., etc., etc. And Capra and Luisi already in 2014 said, it's not a triple planetary crisis. It is a single human crisis. It's a crisis of our perception and our consumption. Have any of you seen Enrique Oliveira's work in Nantes, in France? At Place Graline, I believe it's called. Yeah. What is it? What do you see? Hmm? Yeah. Okay, I don't speak Spanish, but nature in the public area, sort of infusing into, urban spaces, and a tiny little man standing underneath, right? Very small man, very big nature, which of course has been removed from nature. It is dead, right? By the time it arrives at that square, it is dead, right? But we need art to begin to also enlighten ourselves and open our eyes for those different interpretations. Another example is a photo taken by my ex-brother-in-law, who's an emerging artist, photo artist, which he calls the seed of life. So a naked woman crawling out of a tree, right? To indicate, again, the connection to nature, that we can't keep separating, we can't keep dividing. That's what's ruining our world right now, right? We need to look at the relations and the processes. We need to get rid of the idea that harmony and balance is a goal. Right? If we reach that goal in 2030, sort of the world without, would we even be alive? Right? The world would have to come to a standstill. There would be no more development. Right? So, dynamics, and to the fact that it is not just about our own human beings to flourish and to sustain ourselves, but it is about multi-species flourishing. How does that all come together? And what does it look like in practice? So right now I'm involved in a project with Scandinavian meteorologists. And I'll show you that sort of experiment we're currently making in northern Scandinavia. The project is called ISOSCAN, and it's short for Isotope-Aided Assessment and Forecasting of Hydroclimatic Extremes in Scandinavia through Stakeholder Co-Design. So what am I doing with a bunch of meteorologists in northern Scandinavia? Well, essentially they said, we have data scarcity. We need isotopes. They are snow or water samples, composites, that need to be collected in regions of northern Scandinavia in order to provide for more accurate weather forecasts. That is, to provide better preparedness for those who are in nature, but also against the protection against those hydrological extremes, including floods and droughts, but also avalanches and all of those who are in nature at any given time in northern Scandinavia, summer or winter, that is. Here we are at the University of Bergen, right next to a lot of gold medals in Nobel Prizes too, in physics. So I felt like a fish out of the water when trying to engage those very clever people in co-design, asking them to design the journey of an isotope. What does it look like? Where does it go, that particular object? How can we make interventions where we can engage others to help collect those samples? So initially it was a citizen science project, but they failed to actually engage citizen scientists in the project. It was too difficult, or they couldn't be bothered. So what we did was that we engaged a lot of leisure users, including tourists, in Tromsø in order to design a kit that would make it easy for people to engage in this particular process and to produce then useful samples for scientists. But we also wanted to engage users beyond, or those scientists and volunteers beyond just collecting data for somebody, right? So what can we do together? How can we actually add to people's engagement by creating a feedback loop, by making that process that the scientists undertake more transparent, to communicate whether to school children or to tourists or to people who are really engaged in climate research through feedback loops, to try to unlock those potentials for mutual learning and to engage in regenerative leisure and tourism, ultimately to enhance trust in science. Right? Why else bother? And to me, actually, quite a few of those citizen science projects are quite unethical, because they're using other people's time to just collect data following which they have no access or understanding what it's used for. Right? So stop using other people, engage and work with them. Right? Use their knowledge, gain their feedback, and maybe even take ownership. So this is an outdoor provider who we happened to walk by in Tromsø and said, look, do you want to become an ISO scanner? Do you want to hand out those kits to those leisure users who come by your store? And of course he said yes. And in order again to make this more tangible, I have a short video that we've produced to hopefully show what it looks like in practice. Anyway, when you hopefully get the slides, Barbara has promised that she will collect them afterwards. Can you click on it? I think if you put it into presentation mode again and click on the slide directly, it should work. It's thinking. Oh, that's a clever instrument. Anyway, it's a 3-minute instruction video, and where we are trying to actually, we've created a hub for ISO scanners in order to identify with this project, where they get a unique sample number each time they take a sample, which they can follow through the scientific process, and also begin to collect numerous cards. Just skip it and move to the next slide. Just restart. Yeah. Anyway, the project, the first sample campaign, it's called in scientific language, we had between April and May this year in Tromsø, just before the winter season ended. And we managed to actually collect 60 useful samples collected. And it means that this idea of contributing as a regenerative tourist or leisure user in nature should ideally then be scalable. So with a few minor adjustments to the kit, the idea is that we will reintroduce this in the winter of 25, and the project runs until 2026. So it'll come up eventually. This is not in the slide anyway. But to have this project, it's running another couple of years, which ultimately will then help demonstrate whether this attempt to engage other people, whether leisure users or tourists, in regenerative actions, whether it's feasible and scalable. Okay, slide 29, or 28, because now we're moving to the futures. Okay. Meanwhile, I I want you to think about how you navigate futures every single day in your everyday practice. Because navigating futures is an innate human ability. Some of you are already thinking about where you're going to have a drink this afternoon, or when you're going to get a rest, or when you're going to talk to that person you really want to talk to. And of course, in tourism, we're predominantly engaged in exploring the unknown. We go to places we don't know because we would like to get to know more about it. Right? And we find ways to navigate. When I came to the university yesterday, I proudly said to Barbara, oh, I walked, I pictured the line I was going to walk, using Google Maps, and as soon as I got out of my door, I went exactly the opposite direction in order to eventually come back, just like the image I showed you before, right, to where I needed to be. But this is a way to navigate the unknown, right, which we do in our everyday practices. And so from that, we are also in a position to begin to envisage tourism futures, right, where all of us, all stakeholders, can begin new conversations about the relationships, about our interactions, about what we would like this place to be. And when we do this as a process of designing with others, it is also an ethical involvement, a respect for differences, their variation of interpretation, and their way of being in the world, their values and aspirations for a better world. And in the sense, or in the consequences of this is actually that the book I edited with Bedwitz back in 2018, which is called Collaboration for Sustainable Tourism Development, we changed that course in Denmark, part of the EMTM program, to be Collaboration for Sustainable Tourism Design as a consequence of this. Because we need to move away from the way of thinking that right answers need to be taught in the classroom and tourism takes place in areas where we have one single solution, a future to present to others, sort of experts who come out and tell others what to do. That's not how the world works, and that's not how it is going to evolve. This is my latest book from which was launched on June 6th. So if you get your mobile phones out and scan the online version at the very bottom, or do it whenever you get the slides, the book is there as a free download. It's an unconventional book on crossing borders and blending perspectives, where we were 10 scientists and researchers from Denmark, the Netherlands, and Germany, who decided to walk across the Danish-German border and the Dutch-German border a week at a time, sometimes biking, a few times taking public transport, with students, at almost an equal number every single time at a week's duration. And during those 2 weeks, we covered more than 500-600 kilometers, slow mobility through nature to explore what others saw when encountering nature, when encountering UNESCO World Heritage nature, and what effects climate change had. And the book has a section by students, some of them are PhD students, others sort of more conventional research section, and then a section by practitioners. And Jannik Lorentzen, who I'm standing next to, is the 7th generation owner of a marsh farm in the Waddenzee National Park, which has been converted from a pig farm by his parents to a bed and breakfast. And it has been awarded as the most beautiful farm in Denmark. And Jannik's dissertation, his master thesis, which he wrote at the University of Southern Denmark on regenerative tourism development, I had the pleasure to supervise, has been converted into a book chapter. This means, and now I'm about to wrap up, that rethinking tourism and hospitality and leisure is no longer about creating value for the benefit of a single sector, but creating values for the benefit of all. It is about understanding a destination as a unique, multi-layered web of living systems within a specific geographical region. And you need to ask yourself, what can I do and what do we want for the future. It is about insisting on thinking differently, to experiment with sustainable and regenerative initiatives in collaboration with others. And we need to ask different questions. So at that destination, ask, how big is it here? I had to Google Translate your conference bag. How many of you have done that? Do you know what you're carrying around actually and flagging in public? It says something about experience everything. And if you are to experience everything here in Girona and beyond, you need to begin to unpack those multiple layers that a destination is. You need to also hopefully begin to care for the destination, which is imbued by relational values that are often taken for granted. And it helps understand the destination as a living place where it is not only about human residents and tourists, it is about multiple species or multiple beings that exist and connect to each other in a tightly interwoven biome. And that helps determine the reach and the complexity of the destination as the context for regenerative work to follow. It is very much about developing reciprocal relationships with living entities to discover ways to align with and to build the capacity of related sociological systems. It is how the world works, or about how the world works. It is about tourism's contribution to world making. And this I have been fortunate enough to also be able to bring into a new Erasmus Mundus program in the making here at the University of Girona. So it's based, as you can see on the right-hand side, on whole systems thinking. We want to cultivate the ability in our students to focus on existing and new relations, the local context, the dynamic patterns and interrelations, the value creation at multiple levels that benefit local communities, ecosystems, and the planet, and to imagine desirable futures with others. The aim is to educate regenerative future leaders, and from the list of partners you can see, of which some are listed, not all, it spans from the global north to the global south. So Finland, Oulu, Finland in the north, Kenyatta, Mauritius in the south. I've been fortunate to be invited fellow at the University of Cambridge in their Center for the Study of Global Human Movement back in 2021. At Cambridge, they've never worked with tourism. It's Mickey Mouse subject, you know, not really serious research. But a Center for the Study of Global Human Movement that doesn't work with tourism is a little bit limp. So I've been challenged to help chart new research focused on the historiographies of tourism and migration, and spaces for intercultural dialogue by people on the move, and the art of collaboration for multiple species flourishing. So wrapping up, maybe I should have just shown you one slide, because these words by the late Sir Ken Robinson, who was a fabulous educator in the UK, reminds us that we need to learn that there's more to life on Earth than human beings, and more to human beings than self-interest. And our futures depend on learning this lesson by heart. My take on regenerative tourism co-design is a radical shift from a mechanic, reductionist approach to relationships and values and interconnections and processes over fixed structures and goals. And it means fostering an attitude of mind that embraces dynamic change, that nothing is static. And it challenges, indeed, an anthropocentric notion that seeks the flourishing only of human beings instead of all species. And in order to capture that paradigm shift, I've experimented myself. So I offer you a poetic glimpse of a regenerative tourism persona who understands complex and living systems thinking, based on a poet from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. I see a cloud floating in a piece of paper on my desk. Without the cloud, there will be no rain. Without the rain, the trees will not grow, and I will not have paper. If I look more deeply, the paper is full of sunshine, and without sunshine, the forest cannot grow. nor can the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the paper mill be transformed into paper. I can see wheat, knowing that the logger cannot live without his daily bread. The logger's mother and father are in it too. Without all these component parts, and many more, the sheet of paper cannot exist. So take a deeper look, and I will see myself too, and I will see tourists. The sheet of paper is part of our perception, shared in our minds, imbued with variations of interpretation. Everything is in the sheet of paper. The sun, the rain, clouds, river, heat, wheat, love, pain, care, stewarding, and flourishing. It's made up of human and non-human elements. Everything coexists. A symphony of clouds, movement, and collaboration echoes across generations. As thin as this paper is, it contains everything in the universe. So dare experiment with your writing too, even if reviewers are less inclined to accept other formats, as long as it is based on rigorous research. So this is my future as of October 1st. This will be my home. As one of those sort of dynamic futures, unforeseen, and yet it has come into being through a position sponsored by the Catalan government. This is my contract to the left in Catalan, and hopefully in 5 years' time, when we see each other again, if not before, I will be speaking Catalan too. Thank you. Questions and comments? Do we have time, Barbara?
We have time for 2 quick questions.
It's not a proper question, more like sort of comment. How do you see the difference between tourism co-design and living labs? Living labs are being promoted now as the new best thing, like how we should engage in stakeholders. Are there significant differences, or would you say it's two different denominations of a similar concept?
No, I think living labs to me, it's basically a design space where you can invite people in order to explore different areas. But co-designing as a methodology would offer you that deeper philosophical and theoretical foundation to set a frame and make sure that you scaffold activities so that, just like with the film I showed about the parks, that this was one activity, how can you then build on what emerges from that in order to then get them to relate to, for instance, futures? Living labs seem to be more open in that sense, but a method that can be useful in order to do co-designing with others. So thank you, Mia.
Yes,
Maria?
thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I don't know if it works. No, it doesn't. Now? Maybe. Yeah? Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. This is really an extremely interesting and very optimistic presentation. I think this is the kind of engagements we need now, especially when we work in the tourism studies in university and with PhD students. My question, which is not exactly a question, it's a kind of reflection, is how this can work in most environments in which tourism takes place, which are not, how can I say, engaging so organized frameworks of stakeholders, coming from a southern country, Greece, and seeing how tourism works there, and seeing how, in fact, no framework exists more or less. I mean, of course, there are institutions and institutional stakeholders, but in reality, the political context in a general consideration is so much constrained that before arriving to co-designing, we maybe need to take into consideration all these previous steps. I mean that I can imagine this in a kind of totally organized framework, but most problems we do have in tourism today come because we have no regulation. And how this, in fact, which is very volunteer, very, engaging, in fact, approach, how this can connect with the total lack of regulation in some contexts.
I think I disagree slightly with you in the lack of regulation. It's the lack of enforcement, right? And over-tourism as an example, it is, the greed on behalf of very few people that destroy what ought to be the benefit of the most. But the regulations are in place, they're just not enforced. The other part is spot on, because we haven't experimented in other than very well-organized Northern European countries. And that is yet to be done. However, I would say anywhere in the world you can create a space, what I called a design space before in my answer to Mia, where you can invite people in. The trick is to not invite the usual suspects. And that's what we did with the Parks project too. And we said, those who were the park managers, we said, please do not just invite those who you always work with. Invite those who are loud out there, who are against the park, or those who you know have a vested interest, but who are never invited in. And to spark that kind of, again, atmosphere where we are first and foremost listening to each other. That can be done in different ways. It can also be done in the form of, now I'm talking methods, about charrettes. So creating a place in any given town, maybe a town hall, where you solicit ideas from citizens, or the charrette in old days were running, PhD students running around trying to pitch in their project at the end in order to meet the deadline on any given sort of time of the year. But getting those ideas out, all those taken for granted ideas in any given community, with cognizant that, of course, as illustrated in the tourism knowledge system, there are real power structures, there are real constraints when it comes to government governance. But it would be your task as a researcher to try to create that space where people feel safe to actually come and deliver something and engage in discussion. But it takes a space, and that's why, again, the resonance with destinations is much more approachable, in my view, compared to working with the SDGs, because they're so colossal, so enormous. This is all about what goes on in our particular home, which is also subjected to tourism, or maybe subjected to tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, Janne.
My
Today
pleasure.
we have to move on to the first session, but before we do that, Janne, there's a little bit from us. And now we will move on to our first session on mutations in territories and tourism dynamics. And our first presenter is Guilherme Ferreira Rodrigues from the University of Girona.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Good morning, everyone. Bom dia, tutom. Buenos dias. For this presentation, I will speak Spanish with my Brazilian accent, okay? So, bueno, Em primeiro lugar, me gostaria de agradecer a oportunidade de estar aqui, apresentando um pouco de minha investigação a lo largo de estos años y además también me gustaría parabenizar y darle la enhorabuena a la comisión organizadora de este evento. Y bueno, empezamos, ¿no? Para este evento, como hablamos del turismo, de la mutación, el turismo, he querido traer un tema que no es muy común, pero para abrir un poco nuestros oídos, de hecho, que es el tema del paisaje sonoro como un elemento complementario de la experiencia turística. El caso de Ouro Preto, en Minas Gerais, Brasil. Bueno, para acompañarnos en esta pequeña caminata por la mañana, os gostaria de decirles un poco el guión de la presentación, que empezará por el objetivo que me llevó a hacer esta investigación, la metodología que ha sido base para desarrollar el trabajo en campo, el marco teórico. Luego llegamos a la ciudad de Ouro Preto para enseñarles el caso. Enseguida, los resultados encontrados y al final un poco el pensamiento, ¿no? ¿Qué podemos sacar de esta investigación? Bueno, el objetivo principal es único, que es analizar la experiencia turística estimulada por los sonidos presentes en la ciudad de Ouro Preto. Y para ello, la base metodológica ha sido la investigación exploratoria cualitativa, donde ha tenido la base de la teoría fundamentada con dos pilares, ¿no? La observación de campo y la entrevista semiestructurada con los turistas. La entrevista semiestructurada ha sido realizada con 31 turistas en un fin de semana, porque es donde hay más flujo de turistas en la ciudad de Ouro Preto, donde dentro de estas entrevistas he recogido datos como datos personales, informaciones de los turistas, periodo de estancia, ¿no? Más allá, la percepción sonora durante su visita a la ciudad y qué les pareció esta relación con el sonido de la ciudad de Ouro Preto. Bueno, para basar la teoría y realizar el trabajo de campo, he tenido 3 pilares, ¿no? El sonido como pilar base, que el sonido es lo que forma parte de nuestro cotidiano, y en este caso yo recojo el concepto del paisaje sonoro, que es un paisaje que no es tangible, pero es intangible, marcado por los sonidos que conectan con el espacio. Luego ya llego a la escucha, que la escucha es un elemento fundamental dentro de esa investigación para conectar con el espacio. Y de hecho, asociamos al eje antropológico cuando hablamos de un paisaje sonoro con nuestro cuerpo presente para escuchar y relacionar e interpretar esos sonidos que escuchamos, ¿no? Luego llegamos a la experiencia turística. La literatura ya habla de una experiencia turística donde quitamos el ojocentrismo, ¿no? El turismo es una actividad en su gran mayoría ojocéntrica y estimulando otros aspectos sensoriales de nuestra visita también podemos conectar de forma más profunda y diferente con el espacio. Incluso la literatura, incluso oriental, ya habla del sonido como un elemento importante en la experiencia turística, más allá de la vista, ¿no? Bueno, para realizar entonces este trabajo, trasladamos de Girona, cruzamos el Atlántico y llegamos en Brasil, en el estado de Minas Gerais, en la ciudad de Ouro Preto. Ouro Preto es una ciudad que tiene una gran importancia histórica en Brasil porque ha sido la principal ciudad dentro del Brasil colonial barroco donde ha tenido una riqueza y una exploración a la vez de metales preciosos y de oro. Y con esa explotación y este desarrollo económico han tenido huellas arquitectónicas, artísticas, culturales, religiosas y claro, que ha tenido un eje social también. Y con eso se ha convertido en un importante punto del turismo cuando hablamos en turismo cultural en Brasil. Y en Minas Gerais es el principal centro de visitación a este segmento del turismo. Y además Ouro Preto tiene un marco de reconocimiento patrimonial. La ciudad, por su casco antiguo, ha sido la primera ciudad de Brasil a tener un sitio inscrito en la lista de Patrimonio Mundial de la UNESCO en 1980. Hablando del patrimonio material. Luego, cuando vamos al patrimonio inmaterial, hablamos de un reconocimiento intangible del toque manual de campanas y el oficio de campaneros como patrimonio inmaterial a nivel de Brasil. Es decir, se ha reconocido el toque manual de campanas y el oficio de campanero que se realiza desde el siglo XVIII, de la época del Brasil colonial, hasta los días de hoy, como un elemento importante en la comunidad a nivel cultural, no solo de Minas Gerais, pero también a nivel nacional de Brasil. Bueno, con ese contexto patrimonial, cultural, social, vamos a entender qué tipos de sonidos, ¿no?, los turistas al final encontraban en esta ciudad durante sus visitas. Bueno, aquí un poco el resumen de la recogida de datos, que ha sido entrevistado 31 turistas. De esos 31, la gran mayoría dijeron la percepción sonora ha sido el sonido de las campanas. Vale, pero ese sonido de las campanas, ya que han tenido una presencia fuerte en la relación de los relatos de los turistas, ¿qué tipo de relación se vincula cuando se escucha ese sonido de las campanas a través de los relatos? Entonces aquí hemos tenido relación del pasado, de infancia, de la memoria, religiosidad, música, vibración, incluso han tenido turistas que dijeron que le trae una sensación de paz al escuchar las campanas en la ciudad. Pero no solo las campanas estaban presentes en el paisaje sonoro de Ouro Preto. También ha tenido presencia de otros sonidos como música clásica, piano, armónica, los coches en la calle, las motos, los músicos callejeros y los sonidos que venían de las